My name is Eitan Stern from Legalese. Philip Kent is here in the audience, but I'll get to that in a second. Just before I start, I just want to say what an absolute breath of fresh air it is hearing the past two presentations. A lot of the time working in the drone industry, it feels like you're kind of shouting against, like absolutely nothing, and it's really nice to be in a room with people that, think the same and are working for the same goal. So, my name is Eitan Stern. My background is I'm a commercial and aviation lawyer. I run a company called Legalese. We are lawyers for the creative industry and tech industry, and we do a lot of work around the drone and aviation industry. My colleague Philip Kent is in the crowd. Well, we could get him here. I couldn't really get him on stage, unfortunately. But Philip is a pilot, aviation engineer, and now aviation regulation specialist. And what I want to look at today, quite briefly, is drone law and aviation law. For the most part, people here, doesn't sound like people here, but people in the drone industry find aviation regulations very annoying, and instead of helping our businesses and our industry, a lot of people will find that it's been a hindrance by giving a lot of no's. So what I want to look at today is the drone and aviation laws. I want to look at actually how the laws work very briefly, why we have the laws, which is super important, and what we, as people in the drone industry, what we can do to, instead of fighting against the laws, rather use South African law and regulation to help our businesses and the industry. Right. So, just a bit of background then. So manned aviation has been around. Manned aviation is a very highly regulated industry, and it works really well. So at any point above us, there's tens of thousands of flights in the air, and the fatality prevalence is impossibly low. It's almost next to nothing. So, and this isn't by chance. There's an article that we put out in Business Day, Legal Review, about a month ago, which explains in a lot more detail. But briefly, since the first flight in 1903, in just over the 100 years that it's taken us to get aviation from something that birds do to something that you can do with a 40% discount on, with your gym membership, the reason the aviation has got there is because of years and years of trial and error of rules and procedures in keeping it safe. So, for example, with aviation, manned aviation, you've got something called the semicircular rules, which all pilots will know about, and what that governs is essentially, what height you fly at according to what rules. And that's what keeps planes from crashing into each other. You'll also have something, say, you get into an airplane and they say, please inflate your life jackets. Don't inflate your life jacket until you hit the water. The reason why is there was a plane crash many, many years ago, and people survived the plane crash but died because they inflated their life jackets in the airplane and couldn't get out. And that is why today on every flight you will ever go on, they say, do not inflate your life jackets until you hit the water. And it's because of these rules, testing, that today aviation is very safe. So, so if we think about the Joburg to Cape Town transit route, that is the 12th busiest route in the world for flights, and there have been 0 fatalities. And that is how safe manned aviation is. Suddenly enter the drone industry. So from 2013, DJI launched the Phantom, and suddenly, which was a highly capable and affordable aircraft. And what happened was, by 2018, you can basically go into the CNA and buy a drone for under 1,000 rand. So before the Phantom, in order to get into the sky, you either needed to be a bird, or you were looking at about 100,000 rand investment, 6 months of flying, and the ability to get access to an aircraft. Today, all you need is like a generous parent and a MasterCard, and you can get into the sky. And so, not only did humans beat evolution and basically discover how to fly, we, for the first time in aviation history, you can fly with 0 experience or credibility. We essentially democratized the sky, but we did so with very little thought to the recourse. So people here might be thinking, okay, well, that's all good and well, but that's good for the people who fly planes. Planes travel long distances, carry a lot of people. We're drone users. We don't do those things. Why do we need these regulations, and why should this matter to us? To this, well, I absolutely disagree, and so does aviation experts and regulators basically worldwide. But if we want to break it down very briefly, airplanes during takeoff and landing generally fly around 5,000 feet, which is well within the range of a lot of drones. it's also not just the people in this room. Well, what's quite refreshing is that it seems like the people in this room are all in touch and realize why we need the regulations. We should be speaking to the 24,000 or 64,000 other people who aren't in this room. The laws that we have don't need to just affect the people here who are in touch with the drone industry. We need to get in touch with all the people that aren't in this room, that are buying a drone and flying it very, very unsafely. And the laws have to regulate them as well as us. And lastly, I know it's never happened to any of the pilots in this room, but drones do crash. And at some point, hopefully not, but at some point there is going to be a drone crash, and it could be in a public area, and then that is going to lead to a lot of trouble for everyone here, because the drone industry will lose the biggest support that they have and the biggest asset that we have, which is public opinion. So we all need to be very, very worried about that, and we all need to be in touch and supporting the regulations. The point I'm trying to make here is not how dangerous drones are, because they're not inherently very dangerous. The point I'm trying to make here is that we need drone laws and regulations. We need for the drone companies to be licensed. We need for the pilots to have their license. We need for the aircrafts to have certain safety standards, and of course we need rules of the sky for how people are supposed to fly. But the actual point that I'm trying to get to with the speech is what we have learned, what we've seen from the aviation industry, is that unless the industry utilizes the laws and the community rallies together to advance the laws are never going to serve us. I completely agree with what Ken was saying a minute ago. It's all good and well for people to point fingers at the CAA, but it's our duty. The CAA is just one body. It's our duty as the aviation industry to get behind it. So essentially, the CAA and the legislature have been creating the laws for drones and doing a really good job at that. But no one has been pressing back, challenging, testing the laws. And you might say, well, we've been trying to apply for applications and been flying legally, and it hasn't been working. What I'm trying to say is that aviation law doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not an island. You might understand the aviation regulations, but there's an entire framework of laws around that which are there to exist, which are there to help you and your business and the drone industry in general. And the law is there to assist you, and what you need to do is make a choice to interact with the laws, not a choice to try ignore them or try fight against them. And this is essentially, and we can talk about this more later, this is essentially where the manned aviation industry went wrong and did us a bit of a disservice. Manned aviation essentially didn't engage with the regulator and the laws well enough. And the regulator was essentially allowed to implement, did exactly what they were supposed to do, which was implement the laws how they saw fit, and without them being challenged. But what we need is to challenge the laws, so the laws can settle in and find the right balance, which suits the industry and the law and the legal system in general. And this is not something that is unique to aviation. This is how all law develops. The aviation and drone industry just needs to kind of get on board with that. So you might be asking, well, how exactly do we do that? What are these laws that we should be using to interact with the regulator and the legislature and other government bodies? So there's a couple. The first one that we have is the Promotion of Access to Information Act, PIA, as we call it in the legal fraternity. And so the way PIA works is that government bodies can't just do what they want. They have to answer to essentially their employers, which are the taxpayers. So if any government body has a decision and you want to see the information on which that decision is based, you have a right to get access to that information. You've just got to go through a PIA application. And there's been great history in South Africa of that being used and laws being developed because of PIA applications. We've also got the Promotion of Access to Information Act, PAJA. So the CAA, legislature, or any government body has to act rationally in making a decision. And if you feel that any decision wasn't made rationally, then you have a right to question that body to find out their rationale, essentially, for making that decision. We've also got, every company in South Africa and every drone operator has the ability to mediate or ask for mediation or arbitration. So typically, in the past, if a government body made a decision, you would need to accept it. Now you've got the ability to interact with them and say, look, I'd like to sit and to mediate this situation with you and to try find a solution. And that is not just with companies and the regulators. That's something that you have with any company or other competitor or supplier that you land up in a dispute with. The litigation is wholly unaffordable for most people, but there is this other avenue, this legal avenue of mediation and arbitration that you can use. We also have the Public Service Commission, the PSC. This is a government body which is there to regulate government employees. So if there's a government employee who you disagree with their decision or don't think that they've done something right, this is essentially like the teacher that you can go and complain to. And their job is to ensure that us as citizens are able to regulate our relationship with government bodies. Then we've also got the Minister of Transport, shadow ministers in parliaments. And like with any issue, there's essentially a chain of command that exists. And this is something which the previous speakers were touching on. If you don't get the answer that you want, and if the CAA doesn't give the answer that you want, it's not necessarily the CAA's fault. They are just implementing the law, which is their job. But you have the ability to take this up the ranks and essentially go to the minister and then go to parliament. And this is how laws are changed. And that is our duty as the community, not the CAA's job to do. And lastly, of course, there's always litigation. If you feel something has been done wrong and you want to challenge someone's decision, then there's the ability to take them to court, and the rules and the court will make a decision what you think is right and wrong. And again, that is exactly how all laws have developed. It's time for the aviation industry to get on board with that, not necessarily to litigate, but to challenge. Another thing you can do is also engage with lawyers. Unfortunately, lawyers can talk the talk. We understand the procedures, we understand the rules, and we are able to assist with these sorts of matters. Not trying to tout for work in any way. There's a number of clients in our room here, which is fantastic to see. But this is something which other industries have seen great use in, engaging with lawyers to get results. And then lastly, like what Ken was saying, we need to engage with our industry associations. These industry bodies are there to help the industry as a whole. These are things like COASA and CASA. They're essentially like the trade unions for us in the drone and aviation industry. And we all know, I imagine the traffic today is there because we all know how well the trade unions work in South Africa, and so we need to get behind our own industry bodies and support them so they can assist us to develop the laws and develop the industry. And if you're not part of them, then you really should be. So that's about it. My opinion, it's only by doing this that we can start to change the industry and create an industry which suits us. We are definitely at the forefront of what is obviously going to be a massive and very, very relevant industry in the future. And I totally agree with what was said before. We don't want the next generation to look at us and say, well, why didn't you guys do anything about this? Why didn't you come to deal with the industry from the start? Why has it left so many years? So, we as people involved in the industry need to assist with developing these regulations, not just complaining about them. And, us as lawyers are here to help, but what it takes is for the entire industry to rally together to create a legal framework and an industry that we can be proud of. Thank you.